Special Envoy Hans Grunberg is in Riyadh to discuss possibility of truce extension. The United Nations says that civilian casualties mount due to landmines. Yemen-Sweden hospital in Taz lacks funding and basic logistics. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English news with me, Shazad Bilbay. The Yemeni government negotiating team announced that it received a new proposal from the UN Special Envoy for Yemen, Hans Grunberg, regarding the extension of the truce. Nabil Jamal, a member of the government team, pointed out that opening the main roads in Taiz and paying the salaries of employees in militia-controlled areas comes at the top priorities of the UN proposal. As the truce is set to end after a few days, UN Special Envoy Hans Grunberg has intensified efforts to push for an extending agreement. The UN diplomat has landed in Riyadh, where he discussed with Yemeni and Saudi officials the need to expand the truce. This report has more details.
United Nations envoy to Yemen Hans Grunberg arrived in Riyadh as part of efforts to expand the truce in Yemen. The nationwide truce is set to expire on the 2nd of October. It was first adopted in April and has since been twice renewed for a 2-month period each time. Official sources said Saudi Ambassador to Yemen Mohammed bin Saeed met with Grunberg on Monday. He stressed Saudi Arabia's support to United Nations efforts to expand the truce with the aim of reaching a comprehensive ceasefire and a political solution. Grunberg had suggested to the Yemeni government and the Iran-backed Houthis for proposals to expand and improve the truce, including extending it for more than 2 months at a time. He has yet to receive responses to his proposals. In his latest statements, he remarked that results cannot be reached if there is no political will on the part of the Yemeni parties, and this is necessary for success. The Yemeni Presidential Leadership Council is not opposed to making concessions that will favor people living in areas controlled by the Houthis. However, the militia's failure to commit to their pledges regarding the reopening of routes to besieged Taiz City remain a main obstacle in the extension of any truce. The Houthis, for their part, continue to impose new conditions with the aim of achieving political and economic gains. They have already exploited the truce to loot resources and oil derivative revenues and recruit new fighters. The Yemeni government estimates that the Houthis managed in the past 6 months to reap 200 billion riyal from oil derivatives at Hodeidah port. Moreover, the army has accused the Houthis of committing thousands of violations of the truce that have killed and injured around 1,200 civilians and soldiers.
The United States said that the Houthi militia remains the only obstacle to reaching an agreement to expand the humanitarian truce in Yemen. The U.S. Special Envoy to Yemen, Tim Linderking, said in the assembly meetings in New York that if the Houthis cooperate, the employees' salaries will be paid. Linderking repeated his country's commitment to support all efforts made to reach an expanded truce. Oman appealed to all Yemeni forces to move beyond the painful past and focus on a promising and a happy future. Oman's delegate made it clear in a speech before the United Nations Assembly that this matter must be based on the agreed references, including the Gulf initiatives, the outcomes of the Yemeni dialogue, and relevant UN resolutions.
أبي مات بشارع 40 دحين أنا أشقى على أسرتي مع باقي اللي أنا أصرف عليهم كل شيء. أنا اسمي أنس رصيد سيف، عمري 12 سنة. أنا أشتغل بورشة حديد من الساعة 7 للساعة 6. أحيانا أسرع، أحيانا أقص، أحيانا أرنق، أحيانا أنقش، أي حاجة أنا أعمل. لا الساعة لما تبدأ الساعة 6 أوقف. أنا وقفت الدراسة علشان ما في أحد يشقى على أسرتي. أدرس أخواني الباقي منهم 4 وأنا الخامس. أحلم إن أفتح ورشة أبي وأشقى على أسرتي وأمدي لهم مصاري. وأدرس أخوتي الآخر الجامعات وأطبخ أي شيء.
The U.S. Navy announced the seizure of a shipment of heroin in the waters off the Gulf. The U.S. Navy said in a statement that the shipment was the largest ever this year, weighing more than 2,000 kilograms of illegal drugs worth $85 million. The military media of the Joint Forces reported that the monitoring units documented more than 100 new violations of the Houthi militia on the western coast in the past 48 hours. It added that the militia's violations in Hais, south of Hodeidah, amounted to 76 violations in Al-Barah axis, west of Taz. The militia's violations amounted to 40, including shooting from machine guns and attempts to create fortifications. The UN mission to Hodeidah warned of the dangers of mines in the port of Hodeidah. UNMAHA said more than 200 civilians fell victims to the remnants of war since the joint forces were repositioned in November 2021 until now. The mission stated that in the past 3 days alone, 15 casualties were recorded as a result of landmines and explosive devices. A civilian was killed in a landmine explosion planted by the Houthi militia in Ma'rib, eastern Yemen. This report has more details.
A UN mission has announced that landmines and explosive ordnance continue to result in mounting civilian deaths and injuries in Yemen's Red Sea port city of Hodeidah. The UN mission to support the Hodeidah Agreement said in a statement that since the shift of the front lines on November 12, 2021, 242 civilian casualties consisting of 101 deaths and 141 injuries have been reported in Hodeidah due to landmines and other explosive remnants of war. The toll serves as a reminder of the devastating impact that war remnants have on the civilian population of the governorate. UNMAHA reiterated its call for urgent and concrete measures to clear contaminated areas in the governorate. The mission remains committed to supporting the parties and providing coordination and technical support for mine action. Previous reports by humanitarian organizations said that Yemen had become one of the largest landmine battlefields in the world since World War II. According to the Yemeni Observatory for Landmine Removal, an organization documented that 370 civilians have been killed by landmines, improvised explosive devices, and explosive ordnance laid by the Houthi militia from mid-2019 to May 2022. In the past 6 years, the Yemeni Coalition for Monitoring Human Rights Violations has documented the deaths of more than 1,929 civilians, as well as the destruction and damage of more than 2,872 public and private facilities across the country. During the first phase of the UN Mine Action Services project, land survey and clearance operations were conducted in 21 governorates and 233 districts, and over 23 million square meters of land were cleared. The second phase began in October 2021 and is expected to run until the end of December 2026.
While the Yemeni Swedish hospital was a haven for thousands of citizens and families with low incomes in Taz and some neighboring governorates, it turned due to the absence of specialized doctors. This report has more details.
Athmar Jamil, a 6-month-old child, grapples with heart disease in this intensive care unit. She is caught between life and death, the beeping machine an indicator that her heart is still beating. Earlier that week, the child Amr Khaled drew in his last breaths, and Hala, an occupant of the adjacent bed, followed suit.
We had 2 sick patients who needed artificial ventilation. Unfortunately, we don't have the ventilators to carry out the treatment, and the children passed away. This tragedy occurred due to the fact that the children were too sick to be transferred to a different hospital, and to the expenses required to carry out the transfer.
The Yemeni Swedish Hospital for Maternity and Childhood in Taiz lacks modern medical devices and equipment, especially ventilators, and suffers from a lack of medical solutions and inpatient beds, specifically in the premature and newborn department. Only 20 children occupy these beds, and dozens of cases are not accepted due to the limited number of incubators a miserable reality that puts the lives of patients in danger.
نحن نعاني من مادة الديزل.
We are in shortage of diesel oil, oxygen, liquid oxygen, and modern machines. The machines we have are 20 years old and worn out with age. Some incubators are almost 25 years old. If it weren't for the intervention of charitable organizations, this hospital would have been out of commission.
The Yemeni-Swedish hospital receives hundreds of patients daily, as it is the sole hospital concerned with providing maternal and child services in Taiz. Halting any of its medical services is tantamount to condemning the poor, the needy, and those with limited income to death.
يعني البنت حقي بالحضانة ل8 أيام.
My daughter has been here for 8 years. I can't afford the treatment. I can barely afford to provide food for my family.
While the hospital is witnessing a dire humanitarian situation that threatens the lives of thousands of children, its administration affirms its quest to save these children's lives.
Coming next in the news. War and displacement force opposed to work as a shoemaker.
أقول لك راحت بالغداء لأهلها شلت الغداء وراحت بأهلها في المزرعة. والمزرعة ركبت على حمار ما حتى نص المزرعة وانفجر فيها اللغم. دعست على اللغم وانفجر فيهم. الحمار انتهى ما اعترفت بقعت رجليها كامل. نغير منها غير الشبعلة اللي هي البنت سابها من دور رجليها لما صافناها طبية أقرب طبية وصافناها لهي بترت رجليها كامل.
قلت أزود هلي وقابل لي لعب وطبعته تحت الزوايا.
Welcome back. The United Nations reported that more than 200,000 people have been affected by heavy rains and the floods since the last week of August in 14 Yemeni governorates. This report has more details.
Over the reporting period, OCHA services recorded a decrease in floods in several governorates compared to July and August, when heavy rains triggered severe flooding in vast areas across the country. However, areas such as Ma'rib and Hajja governorates were battered with thousands of families impacted. According to reports, an estimated 231,000 people were reported to be affected by floods in 120 districts of 14 governorates between the 25th of August and the 18th of September. With the rains and floods, explosive remnants of war threats to civilians reportedly increased, and partners underlined the need for mine action and awareness in areas hit by floods. In August, 80% of the country received heavy rainfalls, with a cumulative amount of about 2,500 mm, which was 45% higher than the rainfall experienced in August 2021, according to the Food and Agriculture Organization. However, FAO early warned of the first 10 days of September indicated a few governorates receiving 100 mm of cumulative rainfall. Slowing rainfall amount denotes the flood season is ending. The low intensity of floods signaled the end of the rainy season, with impacts generally limited. However, preparedness and resilient building activities are needed to be strengthened to prepare the community for the next flood season while mitigating the impacts. As for the mitigation process, humanitarian partners assisted more than 7,300 households with some form of assistance over the reporting period. However, due to funding shortage, response gaps were reported, with limited or exhausted resources and relief supplies. 8 partners directed resources from existing programs to respond to the immediate need of people. However, more support is needed to address the long-term needs and rehabilitation.
Economic sources revealed that officials in the oil company are prepared to raise the prices of oil in Aden. The sources said the fuel crisis is a made-up one, indicating that private stations opened their doors to drivers for limited hours and then closed them. They pointed out that there is more information that officials of the Aden Oil Company and fuel dealers are matting up the fuel crisis as a way to raising its price. Many employees in government sector found another way out of the tunnel of poor salaries and wages in light of the current economic crisis. This report has more details.
The difficult living conditions that the country is going through have forced many state employees in different sectors to return to the agriculture sector, cultivating many crops with the aim of improving the living situation in light of the continuing crisis of high prices and the suspension of salaries and the collapse of the national currency exchange.
I worked as a teacher here in this district. I've been teaching for 25 years, but after the Houthi control and the chaos that spread across the country, I turned to agriculture in order to secure some money to cover my family's needs and overcome the suffering that we are going through.
Employees say that wages have become insufficient for the requirements of their families, and that investment in agricultural work has helped them a lot in improving their financial conditions and finding alternatives to cover the low wages.
Because of the current circumstances that the country is going through, being a teacher here does not provide a proper income to get our basic needs. I had to go back to work in the agricultural sector in order to provide a living for my family. We're planting sweet potatoes here in this area.
In the time of adversity, the land represents a good source of income for the human beings in Yemen, who lean their back on it to help them face the difficulties of life. With the miserable living conditions, the hands of these government workers have contributed to creating a better reality in order to enhance the lack of salaries that are no longer worth anything, and in front of the insane high prices and the continued collapse of the national currency.
Amid 8 years of war in Yemen, art cannot find a room to thrive. The circumstances in the country led one poet to switch into a shoemaker to earn his living. This report has more details.
After fleeing from this place repeatedly in search of salvation, he returned to it as a migratory bird returns to its nest, and as a small child to his mother. It is Suleiman Tanam's hut, built from the remains of stones, wood, and junk. Here, Tanam family, consisting of 8, lives a life of misery, fatigue, and the calamities of eternity that seemed clear on their faces.
As for the miserable life I am going through, we are suffering dire living conditions. I have no job, and I live with my children in this hut, on a land that is not owned by me, so the owner can kick me out at any time, and I don't know where to go.
Since suffering generates creativity, the poet Suleiman Tanam was born and blessed with a beautiful poetic talent. Decades ago, he began writing poetry in popular parts of Yemen. Recently, a poetry collection was published for him titled Gunj Tanam, and he was honored with certificates for writing it. And he has other 4 collections that need to be taken into consideration and get published.
My first attempt to write a poetry collection was in 1990, titled John Hitanam, and now I have other collections which I want to publish, but no one is helping me.
The war and its disastrous effects prompted the poet Suleiman Tanam to move between jobs and settle in one he didn't expect. Early he leaves the hut and heads towards the inflamed sidewall to work on maintaining and polishing worn-out shoes during his daily working hours.
I work in the street, where some people make fun of me by saying the poet Suleiman Tanam is polishing shoes. I usually tell them that I have to work amid the hard living conditions to feed my children.
The poet Suleiman didn't find it embarrassing to continue with this job, as it is a form of his last chance of survival to escape the hell of war.
Here's a reminder of the main headlines. Special Envoy Hans Grunberg is in Riyadh to discuss possibility of truce extension. The United Nations says that civilian casualties mount due to landmines. Yemen-Sweden hospital in Taz lacks funding and basic logistics. This is the end of the news. Thank you for watching.